All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Is It Pagan? Guys, it has been a minute. Another holiday is rapidly approaching. At the time of recording this, we are about halfway through October, spooky season. And because we are firmly in spooky season here in the States, it is time for Andrew and I to come back together to answer the big questions of Is It Pagan? And this time we are joined with co-host of Kingdom on the Road, host of Love Thy Neighbor, general friend, Anthony Wilson. What's up, man?
Hey man, I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to be a part of this. I've watched it from afar. Now I get to be in it.
So probably safer to watch this from afar, but you know.
Right. So, for those of you that don't know, Is It Pagan started off by accident. It was
and the name started off as a joke, and then just about everything that the two of us are involved with, we realized the joke actually works really well. So why not run with it?
Yeah, exactly. We saw a lot of discourse happening with asking questions of is Halloween pagan? Is Christmas pagan? You know, these holidays
Easter,
have a
Mother's Day, yeah,
right. And so we started coming together to analyze that, to answer those questions. Is it pagan? And so last year we did a full-on deep dive of Halloween, breaking down the origins, whether or not that's a sinful practice to engage with it, all of those kinds of things. And then we recorded a second episode dealing with the spiritual and all of that kind of stuff. And well, the demons took it. And we don't really know.
It was kind of like a Twilight Zone type of thing, because I kind of sort of remembered recording it, which my mind doesn't count. You were confident that not only had you recorded it, but that you had posted it and watched it.
Yep.
And Brother Matthew, who was a part of it, was like, hey, where did it go? I was a part of this. What happened? How did you get me out of the video? And then suddenly we realized that none of us had any clue what was going on whatsoever.
Yep. Still to this day, not a clue what happened to the video.
Yeah.
So here we are. We are going to be breaking down the spiritual, spirits in the Bible, ghosts, demons, the whole 9 yards. And you guys need to stay tuned to the end, because finally I am going to share the story that I have alluded to on BuddyWalk, on Kingdom on the Road, in several different places, when I talk about I did paranormal investigations until I found the thing that goes bump in the night. I'm finally sharing the story, but you guys gotta stay tuned to the end.
Spoiler alert.
So I want to kick off. You know, there's a lot of where the arguments in the discourse tend to originate from when talking about this is Halloween is closely associated in the West with a couple of different religious practices and a couple of different cultural traditions, and it's kind of become a catch-all for a lot of different practices. And so oftentimes folks don't really know how to untangle the web of different influences and where did it actually come from, and does it come from All Saints Day, and does it come from Samhain, and all of that kind of stuff. And so in the midst of all of that is this prevailing thought that on the October 31st date, and for some they will also say the solstice, there's again, it depends on who you ask as to what language specifically folks are using. But associated this idea of weakening of the veil. Everything good, Andrew?
You, the demons were taking you for a second.
You're back now, though.
Yeah, we're good now.
The demons don't want this out, guys. Come on. Somebody call an exorcist. Did I say that out loud? Anyway, so you have this idea of the weakening of the veil, right? And that idea has a way of bringing up a deeper conversation of, well, what does the Bible say about the spiritual? Are spiritual entities a real thing? Are ghosts a real thing? I think most people, if pressed, would say that demons are a real thing because they are directly addressed in the Bible. But even to that effect, it depends on who you ask as to what kind of characterization you're going to get of what exactly a demon is. And so, Ant, I'm going to open it up to you first. What is your background, being the one out of the three of us that is the longest in the tooth? What is your background with the paranormal, with the spiritual, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I've mentioned this before, but growing up, just, I don't know, like most people, I just, had a fascination for, horror and ghosts and the supernatural. And like you said, the things that go bump in the night, the boogeyman, that fear of something snatching you from underneath your bed, and all of those things. What's that shadow in the corner? And I kind of dove into to the displeasure of my mom, things like parapsychology, where I began to kind of read up about basically ghost stories and people's accounts of what they were experiencing. And man, I it's odd, but I began to experience some crazy stuff. I've actually seen some things, and I'm like, I can't explain that. I can't explain how that door shut and there's nobody there. I can't explain why there's something moving around in my basement and nobody's down there. That kind of stuff where you're like, whoa, something's happening here. And I didn't know if I was doing that myself, mentally, and you kind of get off into that world. And I can't wait to hear Joe's story, because I was one of those people that watch those shows, about, those supernatural, hunters, what's going on, as a matter of fact, to some people's displeasure, I'm a pastor and I watched all of Supernatural, like every single season. Yes, stone me, if you want to, but those are things that I kind of had a fascination in, and they don't bother me as much. So here's the caveat: they don't bother me as much as the truly demonic focused, supernatural type things. Ghosts and demons have like separate categories, in my mind. Now we'll get into, specifics, but, when you talk about, so I grew up off of the original Exorcist, right? Freaked me out. Like, what in the world is going on here? Movies like The Entity. I don't know if you guys even remember that movie, The Entity. Poltergeist, right? Poltergeist is my era, right? Don't go into the light, Carol. Yeah, don't go into the light. That kind of stuff. And so I had good reason, growing up in the 80s. There I go, dating myself. Growing up in the 80s, that was kind of right where I was at. There was a movie called The Omens, which is a little bit older. That was freaky. And so those kind of things really messed with me. To this day, stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, you know, those things aren't an issue. Friday the 13th, but it's the heavy emphasis on the demonic is where I get, you know, like, oh, I don't know if I can watch that anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of my background on, my experiences with that type of stuff. Not coming from a biblical perspective, but just talking about what I've experienced growing up and some of the things that I was kind of exposed to.
How about you, Andrew?
So most of I wouldn't even call it experience, but just my dealings with the supernatural spiritual realm type of thing. Um Kind of the opposite of Ant is because I've never had any. My wife likes horror films. I'm just like, okay, whatever. I've never been a fan of those sort of films, anything like that. But when it comes to looking at things like demonology, things like spiritual warfare, things like what scripture actually has, like those sort of things have always intrigued me.
Mhm.
A lot of it I think has to do with the fact of what my ministry ends up being. In a lot of ways, we've kind of as a joke, but also kind of serious. If we were to use the stereotypical American idea of the Lord's Army, my my position within the Lord's military would be a special ops type of thing where I'm being dropped behind enemy lines by myself to clear a path for somebody else to come in and take all the credit. And so part of what that means is that the spiritual warfare stuff that I typically have had to deal with, it's very evident that this is not just people causing problems.
Right.
And even growing up in a Christian school environment with a lot of different, it was an interdenominational, so a lot of different things. We had a student that went on a missions trip with one of the teachers to Spain and was actually cursed by a witch and came back, and we watched what that actually meant because this kid was dealing with health problems. He died on the table 3 times, all these different things. So there's no doubt in my mind these sort of things are real. But they also, for me, are things where we know they're real, but we also know what to do with them. And so they don't have to be scary. We just have to be aware. And so that kind of is more along the lines between that and the stuff we talked about already on the Aliens episode on Misfits. That's kind of the stuff that I've dealt with it more so than anything.
Right. So I've talked about before that I am a longtime horror fan, and I grew up while my entryway into horror was the 80s. Um, a lot of my formative experience in horror movies came from the slasher craze.
Mm.
And so that I didn't grow up with the same emphasis on spiritual fantasy that somebody from like Ant's generation did. This was more, this could happen to you, home invasion, serial killer sort of stuff. It wasn't until, and I had seen The Exorcist, I had seen The Omen and all of that kind of stuff, but it wasn't that same level of this is the main version of what a scary movie looks like. So those were kind of, for a generation, a little passe. And so it wasn't until I was leaving high school, starting college, when ghost hunting, paranormal phenomena really started to see a resurgence in popular media. And so it had it got thrust back into the limelight. And that was the in thing um at that time. And so that was kind of where my on ramp to the spiritual component of all of this really started. And I actually started studying myself things like parapsychology, which, for those of you that don't know, I realized
Right.
that when Ant was talking,
I
that
know.
might be a term that some of you guys aren't familiar with.
Right.
So
Sorry.
the dictionary definition for parapsychology is the study of mental phenomena which are excluded from or inexplicable by orthodox scientific psychology, such as hypnosis, telepathy, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes that is closely associated with experiencing ghost phenomena, experiencing the um, things like poltergeist activity, different things like that.
If I remember right, it's actually what the Ghostbusters department was at the university at the beginning of the first
Yes.
movie. They
Yeah.
were parapsychologists. Yeah.
Parapsychologist. Yep.
Right. Um, so actually, in that, I have a question in all of this, and
Oh, good. We're going
for you too.
Ghostbusters right off the bat. Yes.
um, so
Don't cross
as
the streams.
don't cross the streams. When as we went into the heyday of ghost hunters and ghost adventurers and ghost this, that, and the other thing, um, we started seeing more of a popularization of things like um guardian angels,
Mm.
the idea of grandma Susie visiting you from a better place to let you know that she was okay,
Hmm.
or the idea of somebody trapped here
Mhm.
because they had something more to do, and all of that. And so I guess my question comes from a place of tipping my hand a little bit towards this idea of being a little bit newer to Christianity and all of that kind of stuff in comparison to you guys. But is this just another example of there's nothing new under the sun, and it's just a concept that's been rotated out, and now because of popular media, because of movies like Paranormal Activity and the various TV shows and all of that kind of stuff, that this is just now being thrust back out there?
Some of it. Guardian angels actually is a part of Jewish mythology for some certain sects. So, like, even on Kingdom on the Road, we talked about the figure that wrestled Jacob.
Mhm.
One interpretation of that is that it was actually Esau's guardian angel that was trying to prevent Jacob from actually getting to Esau.
Interesting.
So you've got that sort of thing within Jewish mythology. It's not every sect of Judaism, but there are certain sects of Judaism where that's where that actually comes from, and there are
Right.
certain parts of Catholicism that also latched onto that as well. Got the same thing with things like archangels compared to servant angels, compared to messengers, all these different things. The hierarchy of angels is something that comes out of Jewish mythology for the most part. The
Yeah.
ideas of hauntings and everything like that, I don't know, Ant, you've studied it more than I have. But I would a lot of that is coming much more from popular culture as well as actual. You've got pagan mythology. You've got just general mysticism and trying to explain away certain things. All that sort of stuff throughout a lot of the ancient cultures.
Yeah, I would agree. Starting with the guardian angels, um, that is a concept that is, how do I put this? It's added to in that second temple period. It's like
Mhm.
it grows legs in that period and it begins to evolve. Whereas when you read the Bible doesn't explicitly, speak to specific guardian angels for individuals, although Michael is considered
Right.
the guardian or patron angel over Israel. When
Yeah.
you read the book of Daniel,
Right.
you had the prince of Greece, you had the prince, of Persia. These were angels that were assigned over over those areas. I don't know if you would call them guardians. I mean, I guess some people would, but in
Well,
the
and you've
sense
also
of,
got the Guardians, and again, this is part of why we classify as Jewish mythology, is because it's the same thing we see in other cultures. You've got the Guardians of the Water that are under the river that will be
yeah,
released. You've got the Guardians that are holding the four winds back.
four winds,
All
yeah.
of those sort of things all are associated with what pop culture would consider them to be guardian angels.
And then you think about Peter, right? Y'all remember Peter in the book of Acts? The
Right.
little girl comes to the door, and Peter's standing there, and she says, "No, that was Peter's angel."
Right.
There was an angel assigned to Peter, and that angel came in his stead. Or so I think there's some things that are extrapolated on top of it. But to Joe's question, I think these concepts are going to keep coming back, right?
Mhm.
They're
Right.
going to go away and
Always.
they're going to come back. There's nothing new under the sun. In every culture, there are spectrums, spirits, ghosts, what have you. One of the ones that gets me is in the book of Job. I don't know if you guys
Mhm.
ever read about that, where Job is laying on his bed and he sees a spirit. It doesn't say what this spirit is, but he said there it was a spirit. We are like, what is that? And so a lot of people dive into that as he saw a ghost, he saw this, he saw that. And so I think when we mix and match our 21st century experiences with ancient texts, ancient culture, we come up with our modern day idea of it. But I think there's
Yeah.
always been some type of understanding
Mhm.
of the supernatural breaking through into the natural world.
So one of the things that I'm noticing though with both of the examples that you guys used, well with all of the examples that you both used, rather, um that you are using the definition of angel. You are not associating guardian angel with a spirit of
Right.
an individual. And that's something that needs to be highlighted because yes, there are examples of guardian angels in the literal "this is an angel" context,
Yeah.
but
Right.
not an individual being given the position of being your guardian angel.
And a lot of the trying to think of the best way to say it. A lot of the hype
Mhm.
is tied to this idea of we think, well, we've got to have a purpose somewhere else. If we believe in the afterlife,
Yeah.
then obviously God must be giving us a job. According to Scripture, our job in the afterlife is worship.
Yeah.
Like that.
Enjoy
That
his
doesn't
presence.
right. That doesn't require anything else. Um. So you've got that side of it. You've also got a little bit of theosis theology that comes through as far as, well, we're supposed to be made like Christ, but obviously we're not Christ. So Hebrews says Christ was made a little bit lower than the angels to become human. So that must mean that we must become angels when we die, because we aren't obviously Christ, but we become something more. So that's got to be it. And so it a lot of it is just very bad misunderstanding of both eschatology It's misunderstanding of soteriology. It's misunderstanding of just everything.
Angelology.
Angelology, demonology, all of it. It's understandable where they get it. It's understandable where we get it. And especially for a culture that is very much a post-Christian culture, or a post-Christian culture, as Dr. Linville likes to label it. It's one where media has been promoting these Christian images within the West since all the artists of the West they've been drawing cherubs, they've been drawing all of these different things, and the only concept they had to draw were humanized images of angels. And so that's what we associate with it. And so now that we are even further away within Western culture, that image still sticks. And now we don't even have the theology behind it to be able to say, well, that's not what Scripture says about what happens to us when we die. That also is not what it says about what our responsibility as humans are even while we're alive. So why do we think that's our responsibility while we're dead?
So I want to jump in right there, Andrew. There's an Old Testament, New Testament set of verses that creates what some would say, man, this is a contradiction, right? Mm-hmm. Ecclesiastes 9, right, says the dead have no memory of the living. They know nothing, right? Once they're dead, they know nothing, right? Which kind of gives the idea that once you're gone, this realm is not known to you. Mm-hmm. But then we get to Hebrews 11, right?
Right.
Or 12, sorry, Hebrews 12, or actually the end of 11.
Yeah. It's both, yeah.
Yeah,
both.
Where we are compassed about by this great cloud of witnesses, and it gives the picture that they can see us and they're cheering us on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what that is. But when we add in our experience in this, 21st century world and what we've seen and what we've heard about, we impose that experience on the text instead of letting the text inform our experiences. Right. And so I think, and I say that because I feel like you, I understand where people's, are getting this from. It's not like they're just randomly throwing it out there. There actually is things that from my 21st century experience, I would interpret this way.
Right. And it's the same process as to why we're even having to do this whole, series. Because the same idea, we can understand why why people think this is pagan.
Yeah.
Because we can see how they got there, even though they got there in a very flawed manner. Right. We can see how they got there, so that's part of why we have to do these sort of conversations to correct that, of saying, no, yes, I see what you're doing, but that is not what we actually have here in the text. Because what we have here in the text tells us that you are allowing you're allowing your experience to dictate how you interact with the world around you.
Yeah. Rather
than allowing the Spirit to show you how you should interact with the world around you.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where I bring in a bit of my experience, and we're kind of building up a bit of this to set the stage for the conversation that's going to happen towards the end of the episode. So as a part of that generation that got swept up in the paranormal craze and all of that kind of stuff, and being an alumni of one of the, I'm not going to give it to you guys. If you guys can put 3 and 3 together and get 8, do it up. Whatever. I don't care. But I'm not going to hand it to you. That's some Andrew math for you.
I was about to say, I don't see the problem there.
Yeah. You wouldn't. But so I was very closely associated with one of the biggest paranormal hunting groups in the US by way of my alma mater. And so from the ground, I was involved with this at a pretty decent level. And so I came in with a lot of the non solid foundation of what the Bible actually says, coupled with a very high knowledge of what pop culture says, and swept up in the moment of, oh, this is all really cool and all of that kind of stuff, and being into that sort of stuff. And so I came in with this idea of people-based hauntings were on the table and had been given the proof text that this was a thing. Now, mind you, we're talking a lot of years ago. This is not I'm not speaking in terms of the present. I'm speaking in terms of the mindset in which I entered into paranormal research and ghost hunting and all of that kind of stuff. And so by virtue of people knowing my background and knowing how you or how I got into all of this and all of that kind of stuff, and then on top of it, when I let people know, so before I was a Christian, I went as far as to study the occult and was involved in a lot of those kinds of rituals and worships and all of that kind of stuff. I get this question a lot of where does the Bible land on people-based hauntings and guardian angels and that aspect of it. And a huge go-to that I hear people talk about when they talk about this sort of thing is they reference the medium in the Old Testament, and then they reference on top of it the reaction of the disciples in the boat when they see Jesus walking on the water. That's kind of a go-to 1-2 punch that I watch people kind of go to, that would say like, oh, hey, this is normalized in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. It's normalized today, but that doesn't necessarily speak to the validity of anything that's normalized.
I would also, it's gonna be hard to argue something is normalized when everybody is freaking out. If it was normalized, they'd be like, "Oh, look, he's back," not a, "Oh no, what is that?" But
the concept of it even being.
I'm just saying that kind of just always just strikes me odd when people are like, "Oh, it's normal." It's like, no, it's not. There's a reason it's called paranormal. It's not actually normal. Just saying.
So this conversation gets chunked into a couple of different key points that I think have to be addressed when we start talking about the spiritual and all of that kind of stuff. And I think the first one that you need to address is, in the midst of dealing with all of this stuff, does your Uncle John come back? Does your Aunt Sue Ann come back? And I think I've gotten to the point, if I can be honest with you guys, between the three of us and the wall, I think I have started to develop a heart for addressing this sort of thing, because like on one hand you want to be authentic to the Bible, right? You want to be accurate in all of those kinds of things, but generally the people who believe in this stuff are believe in this because there's some kind of emotional connection tied to this. There's a reason why people want to believe in people-based hauntings. And so
there's a Modern Family episode that highlights this real well in terms of the fact that, you know, the whole reason that Gloria believes that her aunt is talking to her is not because she actually believes the aunt is talking to her. It's because of the fact that it's what is allowing her to tap back into the emotional memories of being with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna go out here and say this from the standpoint that I come from, and I'm very purposefully going to allow you guys to fill in the coloring of the lines with the biblical aspects of this. So that way we're all kind of adding the seasoning to this. But no, that's when we talk about the grand scope of the spiritual, there's no evidence that would dictate that it's people returning back, or that there is actually a weakening of the veil between dimensions or between worlds or anything like that, from a biblical standpoint, but also um, from the actual field of paranormal research. There is a definitive line between mediums who tend to be looked down upon within the field, who are saying, I'm getting the voice of your Uncle John speaking to me, and researchers who study energy, who study vibration, and those aspects of it, that would say that it's a term called residual hauntings, where it's the left behind energy of an individual that's manifesting in the form of a paranormal event.
So let's start with this, because there's a couple of different levels to all of this. But the first thing in dealing with the idea of what does the Bible say about people coming back, when you look at 1 Samuel 28, which is the Witch of Endor, the story itself is set up to where it has to have been Samuel that was speaking. And even the witch's reaction is that way, because Samuel does not come up the same way that she's used to with all of the ones that she normally speaks to. Samuel comes up confident and ready to go. But Samuel is also is the prophet of God. This is not a normal everyday person that she's calling up. And even Samuel is like, what are you doing talking to me? It's like, I'm in retirement. And he's like, you go and talk to the living prophets and leave me alone. But because you did this, guess what? Your rule is over. And so this was not just a, like, oh, we're just going to call him up and he's here. This was a prophet of God that was fulfilling the final phase of his role on this earth, which was ultimately to usher in David's kingdom and usher in the Messianic kingdom. When you look at, then you fast forward, the other place we see actual manifestation of actual people coming back, there's two other places in the New Testament. You've got the Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah show up. But again, Moses and Elijah are not your everyday average people. They're literally the law and the prophets. And they don't show up because they've been conjured. They show up because the Messiah has finally returned, and everything they had worked for, God was giving them the opportunity to see. The other place we see it is when Jesus dies. It says that the living rose. The prophets of old rose, and they entered the towns. But again, these are the prophets of God, and it's because of the fact that death was no longer an option for the people of God that they rose. So this is not just something where, oh, well, we can talk to the dead and the dead can talk to us, and it's automatically that person. The examples in Scripture of this happening are dealing with the prophets, they have a different, in a lot of ways, a different spiritual chemistry and a spiritual genetic than the rest of the people on the planet. God uses them even after death, which is part of what the scriptures say, because that's why we have their writings. Their word continues on even after death. So why can't God use them after death? But that's not to say that Uncle Joe is going to come back just because you go to the right medium who does all the wrong stuff to get that result.
Yeah, and I would, continue that thought process looking at 1 Samuel 28 and then comparing it with Ecclesiastes 9, where it says the dead know nothing, right? They're gone. What happens in 1 Samuel 28 is, like you said, a very specific situation where God is bringing this about to give Saul his final judgment, his final word. And so Samuel is still functioning as the prophet in Israel at that particular time. This was not a normative event. This is not known. This wasn't happening all over the place throughout scripture. Although mediums and spiritists were something that the Israelites were warned about consulting them. Mm-hmm. And I believe that warning, again, we don't know the fullness of it, but whatever they were doing, they weren't actually bringing people back. This even surprised the witch at Endor. She was blown away, like, whoa, this worked. This happened. That's, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so I think, like you said, their reaction to it is not normative. And even when we look at, like you said, the New Testament, and we look at the Mount of Transfiguration, where they come into play. Again, this is a sign specific to what's going on at that time. And I think we use the exceptions as the norms, mm-hmm. instead of leaving them where they are. They are the exception, and this is kind of off subject, but it's still on the same subject. There's a passage in Acts chapter 19 where the Bible says that God does unusual miracles through Paul, mm-hmm. where even his handkerchiefs were taken. And so today we try to normalize it. So everybody grabs a handkerchief and tries to heal people with it. The Bible said that it was unusual. That this was not the normal way.
Or we go the other direction. And because of the fact that people have tried to normalize it, we have to say, oh, this can never happen again.
Ever.
Right.
And so
God doesn't have the right.
Right. And so we've got all of the, we either go one extreme or the other. And that's part of why I liked how you brought up Ant earlier as far as what Hebrews 11 and Hebrews 12 actually talks about. Mm-hmm. Is what we have there is exactly what we actually see if Saul had done it correctly. And for Samuel, if he had actually listened to the words of the testimony of the prophet Samuel, he never would have tried to manifest him there.
Right.
And because he did that, he, using the imagery out of Hebrews 11:12, he got ensnared and did not finish his race.
Right.
But for those of us that are willing to listen to the testimonies that are still speaking to us because we have the same spirit within us, we are able to finish the race. And so it is a spiritual indwelling, but not in the way that gets talked about this time of year, or even gets talked about with the hankies or anything else. It is a matter of
the hankies.
It's a matter of, the same spirit that was in Paul is in me to complete the same work that God has set out to do within the world.
And I want to throw this out here, and I want Joe to really get involved in this particular one, because you kind of mentioned it with the ritual around, Sam Hale and the veil of living and dead being at its thinnest, right? At that time of, what we're calling Halloween, and how, they would do their rituals, whatever those were. I know you guys have done the research on the rituals to keep those spirits from the dead from invading, right, the living. I think about Ghostbusters, right? And the whole thing is that Gozer the Gozerian
Yes.
wants to come and unleash all the spirits who have died before, and they're trying to open that veil, right, to unleash them onto the modern world. And so I think, when we're looking at that, when it comes down to this idea of grandma or grandpa, I think we understand why people want that, right? But when it comes down to malevolent or evil spirits, what is it that brings that about? What is it that brings that fascination with quote unquote haunting? Again, using supernatural, this person died a violent death, right? So now they're going to come back and they're going to punish everybody. When you guys think about that, and a lot of people associate that with Halloween as a part of the main ingredients, right? Is that it's about these hauntings. How do you guys think about or process that belief of the malevolent spirits coming back versus, grandma comforting me? I think that's
right.
We get that, but
We want the hug.
Malevolent spirits coming back and people believing that this person, being punished or whatever. Yeah.
So there's a couple of different layers to this, because to say that something cannot be haunted or possessed would be to discount probably 30% of the book of Acts and the Gospels. So we're not saying that. What we are talking about here in a lot of ways is the pop culture side of this. In terms of it's, some long lost, serial killer type of thing. Even though Jesus does not explicitly talk about this, one of the parables does deal with this. When we talk about the rich man and Lazarus, because the rich man wants to go back and warn people about the damnation that's coming if they don't repent. And he's not allowed. He is bound. So there is some, of Jesus's teaching that you can say, like, no, this is not what we see in Scripture as far as that they're going to come back. But what we do see at the same time, and this is where it gets into what we talked about before as far as like the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Greece or the Beast of Babylon, all these sort of things, is the idea, the spiritual, the evil spiritual assets of a culture or of an antichrist figure or all these different things that we do see showing back up in other apocalyptic places, or that we do hear the Bible explicitly addressed by name as far as this is a spiritual indwelling that is a problem. Or you've got things like legion of demons in the Gospels. So we've got, there's, like I said, there's layers to it in terms of what the Bible actually says about these sort of things. It's not what pop culture tells us it is.
Right. So, but you're hitting the gas in the wrong spot with this question. This is the idea. What Ant's getting at is the idea of why is it popular to think about by doing this I could get a demon. By this I could bring back the spirit of this right. Long dead serial killer or something along those lines. Right. And yes, put a pin, listeners, put a pin
Spoiler
in
alerts.
what Andrew just talked about, because there's going to be themes of that are going to come up in a little bit. That's kind of the third step in this process. But you have this popularization of the evil portion of it, for the same way that I think horror movies are a thing.
Mhm.
And why there's any kind of, I think at the end of the day, it's a combination of, you, on one hand, people like being scared, people like that portion of it, but on the other hand, if we are going to go as far as to say that on the other side of the veil, that we are active and we have a job to do and that all of that kind of stuff, then you kind of have to take the good with the bad.
Mhm.
And there's syncretism to this, where you pull in other belief systems that seem to credit what it is that you're believing. And so it kind of gets homogenized into a single belief system. And that's where I think we start to get into the idea of, we do these things ultimately with something positive in mind, but as a byproduct, we could slip on the proverbial banana peel. We could, when you open the door, you don't know what's going to come through the door, sort of thing. And this is where we get into the conversation of, okay, we're stating that it's not a matter of a family member. So what do we do with the paranormal? What do we do with the spiritual? What do we do with all of this kind of stuff?
Real quick before we do that, because I got a question for you, Mr. Media, Joe.
Mr. Media.
How much of this desire, in some cases, to, desire for the occult, desire to be possessed, whatever it might be, comes from the way that media actually portrays the power that comes with possession, or with all these, the media portray, same sort of things you hear about with people wanting to be Sith rather than Jedi because they're way cooler than the Jedi. Like, how much of it do you think is actually more of the media's representation of what comes with it than it is even necessarily an actual spiritual desire for it?
First off, I'm going to say the Jedi were the villains of the prequel series.
Yes, they were. And we've already had that discussion. So
I'm going to be honest. There were a sudden crop up of a lot of people who felt things and had medium-esque powers as these things became more popularized.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much that people have a desire, yes, there were some people that were like, I want to be indwelt by an evil spirit. It wasn't so much that as it was this ability to communicate or have power over the spiritual that you started to see really emphasized in this age of really post 2005 on. Some may argue a little earlier than that, but really you started to see this becoming mainstream 2004, 2005. And suddenly everybody had an experience. Suddenly everybody was a ghost hunter. Suddenly everybody was a medium.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there absolutely is a measure of the tail wagging the dog when it comes to how much people were influenced by pop culture as far as all of that stuff goes. So one of the things that I want to highlight as we move into, so what do we do with the spiritual? What do we do with all this? Jesus, if we're sticking to Jesus, Jesus warns us.
It's a good place to stick.
Yeah. Don't mess with this stuff, man.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. Notice though, to I think it was Andrew's point about an overcorrection that we make. He doesn't say, don't mess with this stuff, man, because it's fake.
Right.
Those words never come out of Jesus's mouth. And I will tell you from firsthand experience, when you have rituals and you have practices, yeah, if you go up on the internet and look up spells to make somebody fall in love with me, even people within occult practices will tell you that stuff's garbage for 14-year-old people who want to, make their crush fall in love with them or something.
And spend $9.99 while doing it.
Exactly. that even the people like deeply in the actual religious practices will tell you that this stuff is fake. But you have this version of it that is, I guess, more time honored in a way, and speaks to this idea of engaging with spiritual forces. Mm-hmm. Now, from the Christian dynamic, and this is part of where last year's conversation went, and I'm kind of glad that we get to have a more fully fleshed out. My thoughts on this dude are a little bit more fully formed, but there is a big part of this conversation for Christians tends to hinge around the gentleman, Dr. Michael Heiser. Yes, he has to come up in this conversation. Yes, I understand that he has since passed. I understand all of this kind of stuff. But with the Unseen Realm really getting popular, with his teachings on it really gaining popularity and all of that, now there's kind of been a reemergence of this idea of the spiritual dynamic of things for Christians. But very specifically, like within a specific realm, that like in a specific mode of thought that doesn't really lend to opening to a wide angle view of spiritualism and all of that kind of stuff. And so as we move forward with this, okay, so you mean to tell me that every single time that I've heard something, seen something, experienced something, you mean to tell me that because it wasn't my great Aunt Susie, it's all fake? No, by no means.
No.
Because if the Bible is to be taken seriously, then we need to accept the fact that there is a spiritual component to it. And as you engage with these things, you understand, yeah, things exist, rituals exist that do open doors into our plane, our realm, our dimension, there's different words that you can throw in there, kind of all circling the same thing. And this is where this conversation gets mightily nuanced, because it's a minefield separating out fact from fiction and all of this kind of stuff. And so unfortunately, part of this conversation has to be an hour long of separating out, hey, sorry, the Bible doesn't speak to this idea of people and people-based hauntings. Energy, I think is one of those things that we have to accept, that there are certain metaphysical ideas within our universe that we can't necessarily fully put lyrics to, and all of that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean it's all real, but I'm just saying, like,
Well, and
metaphysics.
there's a couple of facts that we can get from scripture right off the bat to help with this. And if you are a Christian, you believe these things whether you realize it or not. Because if you don't believe that the supernatural realm can interact with the physical realm, then you have completely misunderstood what the gospel is. Right. Because the gospel is God coming to earth as human.
Yeah.
The entire idea of being indwelt by the Spirit, which is the baptism of the Spirit that we preach out of the Great Commission, is you being indwelt by a supernatural deity and a being. The entire idea of the laying on of hands, the power of prayer, all these things, is that we can interact with the spiritual from the physical.
Right.
So if you think that all of this is just, pop culture, sci-fi, whatever, you may need to go back and look at what you actually believe about who Jesus is and was and what he's doing in your life right now.
Right. So with that idea, we can look at, chunking off the pieces, right? We've talked about humans, we've talked about energy. Now we got to make sure that we're not throwing this entire thing out and saying, well, the spiritual goes to.
Insert my premature dialogue here.
Yeah. And so as we delve into that portion of things, this is where I have to be authentic about the fact that, so to continue on with the story and building out the story, the hilarious portion of all of this, honestly, is that for those of you that understand paranormal research, you understand what I'm copying to. I have since grown and understood who these people are and what all of this actually is and all of this kind of stuff. I used to look up to Ed Warren a lot. And Ed Warren classified himself as a demonologist. I will tell you, Lorraine Warren, you want her to be your grandmother, whether you know it or not. She's just the most kindly older woman. She just was this little sweet woman that just was so soft mannered and all of that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, and Lorraine Warren were two of the biggest con people that our modern context has had. I said what I said. They were nice people, but con artists, 100%. And because I looked into and looked up to Ed Warren, because I had the background in the church, because I always kind of like, I thought, like certain things about like cool, spooky, whatever. I called myself a demonologist. And so for more religious-based hauntings or more extreme hauntings or paranormal cases, that's where I would get called in. And I would bring my team in as like an offshoot of the main group. And one of the things before to squelch somebody screaming at their phones right now, the first thing that we would do every single time is a mental health evaluation. Every single solitary time we would do a mental health evaluation. And then from there, we would evaluate whether or not we went in and all of that kind of stuff. We really did try to keep people safe and all of that kind of stuff in the midst of all of this, even if some of the deeper nuances of all of this were a bit disregarded. And so before I really jump into the nuts and bolts of the story, it's important to take something into consideration. And this is where Dr. Heiser comes back into the conversation. And then this is where I'll be interested to hear from you guys. There are a lot of things that I think have benefited Dr. Heiser's academic research. I think the same thing that makes movies like The Exorcist long-standing traditions are some of the same things that keep Dr. Heiser's research in the unseen realm relevant. Not to mention, I do think that he does raise some good points as far as spiritualism and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm saying that on top of anything that may be credible, I do think that there is a promotion in this idea of taking it too far that stimulates the conversation. And so while I will openly state, yes, I don't think that I've heard everything from some of these spiritual figures that are referenced in the Old Testament and referenced in the New Testament are names for people groups that are just like myth that are handed down from generation to generation, or they're misunderstandings within translations, or their reference to people like rulers that just got turned into this mythological figure. There's different flavors of things that I don't agree with any of those. I think that the Bible is pretty specific about the fact that there's it's not just a matter of God and angels and demons being the only spiritual forces that exist. Now, again, you can go off in a lot of different directions, and that's why I needed to separate myself immediately to say that there is baggage with the unseen realm stuff that I don't dig. I don't vibe. I think he goes far too far into mysticism and myth and assumption and all of that kind of stuff, just in a different direction than the people who say that it's all fake. But this idea of spiritual warfare, that's biblical, yo. Mm-hmm. Like that's not something to be shied away from.
So let me start there.
Yeah, go for it.
Specifically, a lot of what, especially in American culture, that gets labeled as spiritual warfare is not actually spiritual warfare. We like to think it is, because for whatever reason that means that our cause is just. But that's not what we see with spiritual warfare. You know, I've heard people claim that not getting the closest parking spot is spiritual warfare. We've heard things like, oh, our president didn't get elected, so that's spiritual warfare. We've heard all, different things like even, I don't know how many people are claiming right now that the conflict going on in Gaza is spiritual warfare, not actual warfare. It's like, no, this is actual warfare that's going on over there. And we need to make sure we address it that way, because there are image bearers in the line of fire that if we are just dismissing it as some spiritual warfare, then we are going to miss the image bearers that are actually needing to see the love of Christ through all of this. When we are talking about spiritual warfare, we are talking about situations where the cause of Christ is being blocked, and not because of physical circumstances, not because of something where it's the Spirit of God saying, not yet, you need to wait, but because of actual warfare going on to prevent the message from trying to move forward. That is what spiritual warfare actually is. And the way you can tell the difference is in how you actually go about dealing with it. Because if it's just some physical circumstance, you'll probably be able to deal with it. You may pray. It may be some outside. You'll be able to deal with it, and you can say, yeah, God has provided, and God has provided. But it doesn't mean it was spiritual warfare. These situations are where you know beyond a shadow of the doubt that the only reason you moved forward is because of the fact that the Spirit of God is the one that moved it forward. And there is nothing that I could have done to allow it to move forward other than let God do the work. Because we don't actually fight the spiritual warfare battles. God fights the spiritual warfare battles. We are the ones that experience it and sometimes are traumatized by it and all these different things. But if it is a spiritual battle, then we can trust in the fact that God is in control and that God is going to do the work. And so we don't have to fear it. We don't have to, and we also don't, most people that have actually dealt with it are not sitting there going, oh, I wish I could have a spiritual battle to know that I'm on the right path. Because you don't want to be dealing with it. It messes with you physically. Right. Your body feels it.
Yeah.
But your body also feels the presence of the Spirit doing the work for you. That's what spiritual warfare actually looks like and how it is dealt with. It's not we put on the full armor of God and march into battle carrying the flag and everything else. It's we put on the armor of God so that we are protected from the enemy's attacks. And then we sit back and we watch the Spirit do what he's going to do because we've humbled ourselves enough to let God work.
Yeah. Can't.
Yeah. When I think about spiritual warfare, I do want to separate warfare from spiritual warfare. You know, there is warfare just in living life.
Mm-hmm.
In attempting to do things in life, you face opposition, right? But when you're doing things specifically, you know, for the kingdom of God, for the glory of God, in the name of Christ, there is a spiritual battle that is ensuing that is beyond, as you said, Andrew, what can be quantified in just language. Sometimes a person would have to discern that this is not natural. like this is not something else is going on here. And you would have to be first certain that you are persevering into doing God's will. Because like you said, okay, I applied for a loan and I didn't get it. Is that spiritual warfare? Well, there's a lot of factors here that we have to figure out, because if you're just applying for that just so you can have some extra money, I don't think that's spiritual warfare. It is opposition to your purpose, your plan, but it's not opposition to God's purpose and his plan, which that's where spiritual warfare comes in. And I think defining the battlefield is important. Because like you said, a lot of things that are considered spiritual warfare, I just didn't get what I wanted. I just didn't get my way. That's not spiritual warfare, you know. And even some of the stuff that we joke around with, right? There's a demon in the microphone not letting us record, that kind of stuff. Could be just technology. It's just technology. That's the way technology is. Everybody who uses technology understands that you're going to go through things like that. But then there's times where you're going through something and you can feel that there's opposition, restricting you. And like you said, you can feel that on a different level. It makes you doubt or question, God's calling, what he's asked you to do. You're rethinking it. You're ready to, you are facing some heavy opposition right there, because that is coming from a different place. And sometimes spiritual warfare is influenced by our own flesh. So we have multiple fronts where we're battling. We're battling, the enemy, You know, we're battling the spirit of the world, and we're battling our own flesh that sometimes partners with,
Right.
you
And
know.
and that's where, one of the other key things to distinguish here is whether or not spiritual warfare or it's you resisting what God is telling you to do. Because that's what, we there I can't remember where it is in Acts, but that's one of the things you have in Acts. They wanted to enter Asia. They knew they needed the gospel needed to get into Asia. They tried and tried and tried, nothing would happen, but they didn't say Satan prevented us from entering. The Spirit prevented us from entering.
Right,
The time was not ready.
right,
That is a different type of spiritual warfare. That is the spiritual warfare we see in Genesis with Jacob wrestling. It's you and God that you
right,
need to get something right, and that's conviction, and where humbleness is the requirement. Not a humbleness to know that God is in control in the midst of a spiritual battle.
right.
There are two separate things, even though, again, we paint them with the same brush. I don't know if we do it because it's easier, because we don't fully understand it ourselves or what, but we've got to actually distinguish, because like you said, discernment is a big piece to being able to deal with all of these things.
Yep.
So I want to take this out of the ethereal and bring this back into the physical. Because Andrew, you touched on it a little bit. But this is, I think part of this conversation gets lost when it gets real ethereal. Because spiritual warfare, yeah, you have to have some of that conversation, but I think some of that conversation misses the point of discussing the large narrative of engaging with spiritual forces and things like that. Like, yeah, sure, that's not the same thing as, oh, did I lose my parking spot because of spiritual warfare? Like, yeah, no.
Right.
But at the same token, I think it misses the reality of the dangers of misunderstanding what the spiritual, like the side of spiritual warfare that does mess with the physical, that does affect our lives and things like that. And there is a fine line between fearing it and respecting the fact that that this exists. And so as we engage with this stuff, it's important to understand that while this aspect of it's twofold. One, you're not going to accidentally engage with the spiritual. You're not going to accidentally engage with something that is outside of the realm of what you should be. All of that is very intentional, and I went into that on an episode of BuddyWalk this week, talking about the intentionality of worship or practice or ritual. Even people that are engaging with these things in a way that is seeking to call them out, they will tell you that your posture and your position matters. Like, you're not just gonna accidentally throw this thing together, and that's part of why we have to separate out the mainstream of it all, because the reality is that if popular media would have you believe that you can accidentally conjure up a demon, but recognizing that these things are a thing is different than purposefully and intentionally calling something forward. And that's why we draw the dichotomies that we do, because this idea of opening the door and not knowing what's going to come through, while it has levels of, okay, we need to separate fact from fiction here, it's still this idea of, if I am engaging in a practice that I am very specifically by the Bible told not to do, all in the name of re-engaging with a loved one, and you could have the best of intentions, but you're still engaging with this activity in an effort to pull something forward, that's something you have to like be aware that when, as you are purposefully engaging with these things, you are inviting problems, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, as you were talking, I was kind of flipping through, the Bible in my head, and I was thinking about where Paul in Corinthians, I think it's Corinthians 10, he talks about them and the table where they sacrifice to idols. And he said in this particular table, this ritual, he says you're sacrificing to demons. And like you said, this was intentional, and he's warning them about this intentional practice of whatever they were doing at this table that was, conjuring spirits or what have you. You go back to, the Old Testament, same type of thing, where I think it's Deuteronomy 32, 17, one of Heiser's spots that he likes to land in. It talks about them not worshiping God, but them worshiping new gods. And these new gods were demons. And so the formation of idols, were to give a physical formation of, it wasn't like the demons in the idol, but the idol itself was inspired by these spirits, and it's intentional. It wasn't like they just tripped over something and, oh, I've got, so, and this is what I wanted to ask earlier. Again, being, a movie fan, sci-fi fan, there's this movie, The Mummy, right? And there's this character in The Mummy who just runs around, everything's cursed, everything's cursed. And so in our popular, mindset, what if I picked up something that was cursed? What if I accidentally, I'm somewhere and I like this particular, magnet, and, and I brought it home and it's cursed, right? And so now I let a demon into my house, because it's cursed. And I think what you're saying, and I agree with you, is that these practices are intentional, that you're not going to just accidentally, let a demon into your house, especially
Right.
if we're saying that greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. If we're saying that we're in Christ, well, the last place a demon wants to be is where Jesus Christ is,
Right.
And
In
so
the presence of the Lord.
right in the, come on now. And so I would have to be trying
Yeah.
to somehow, make that happen. We don't just stumble into, these situations. We're intentionally involving ourselves in stuff. And I think in that sense, you do, run the risk. But I wonder, you know, how you would do that. Would you be just that naive or ignorant to the fact that this is real? And that's why I like what you're saying, is that he didn't tell them to stay away from this stuff because it wasn't real.
Right.
He told them to stay away from this stuff because it was, because you would be encountering something that is, against God and against whom you serve and against what you believe. One more thing, and I think it's Deuteronomy 13 or Numbers 13. It talks about a prophet or dreamer of dreams, causing, something to come to pass, performing a miracle. But after they've done this, they ask you to follow a different God. Now, in that, hidden in those words is that it came to pass. But they're asking you to follow a different God. So this person, the prophet, a dreamer of dreams, and they perform a miracle, they say a word, it comes to pass, and then they offer a different God, which kind of shows you that it's not about it being fake. It's about, who are you following? Who are you worshiping? You use the term intentional worship. Who are you worshiping? So,
right. Because you have to ignore certain parts of scripture in order to say I'm doing this for like Christian reasons.
Yeah.
So so this idea is that if you are doing a practice to elicit some kind of response, then you are doing that practice that has its foundations somewhere. So, story time with the Saints. So as I have been alluding to, I was out. I would do different cases that were more extreme in nature, different ones that were religiously based, all of that kind of stuff. And I get a phone call from one of my team members. Hey, a family friend is going through some things. They're experiencing some things. They're talking about just feeling dark energies, all of this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, let's do protocol, get them over the files. We'll send them over the mental health evaluation. We'll go from there. This is getting bad. We need to, asking if we could fast track this thing. Mind you, if you're watching a horror movie, these are the moments where you're screaming at your TV saying, "What are you doing?" But I digress. I was like, you know what? I'll do it for a friend. That's fine. I'll go ahead and I threw together a small team. We went out there, just look around, fine, see what we see. I have had a fair few set of experiences in my life that kind of, in retrospect, play out kind of like a movie, right? We came up on this house. I don't know if it was the architecture. I don't know if it was the setting, whatever. It could have been a variety of different things. Dude, this place, that there was a vibe going on just driving up on this place. So I was like, oh, do not continue. But I continued, and we go in there and we're looking around, and the best thing that I can describe it is the second that you walked in, it was like walking through soup. The air was thick. Things felt off. Just everything just felt sour. We go up to the bedroom, and there is a woman with us who was sketching. If she saw something, she would sketch it. And we get up to this closet, and she looks into this closet, and she's just staring into this closet, and she's sketching. and she sketches this picture of this cloaked-esque figure standing like in the closet, like staring back at her. And we're there for probably about 5-10 minutes, and then another one of the team shows up late, would proclaim to be an empath, but not in like the I am highly emotional sense. I mean that in the paranormal sense.
Right. Sense, yeah.
Walks into that room, immediately starts crying, has to leave, and goes home. Like, just bang, bang, bang. Like, the series of events were just, like, starts crying on a dime, says, I can't do this, walks out the door. Guys, we're not even to the investigation yet. And we're, like, all of this is transpiring. The actual, like, client, the person who is the source of the events, wouldn't go into this room. Brother gets home and is saying about how he and his sister both would get scratches in this room, like wake up with scratches and all of this kind of stuff in this room in particular. So we are going through, and like all of this is happening, and like afterwards, like we finally wrap it up. She stops sketching, shows the sketch. We go through, we go downstairs, we're talking to the family. The mom's super uncomfortable about us being there because they're all very, very Catholic, and like just uncomfortable with this whole scene. I'm uncomfortable with this whole scene because this one hit different. Like, I had experienced things that I thought were real up until this point, but if this was the measuring stick for what was real, then nothing that I experienced up until this point measured up to this. And so we met as a team afterwards. And I'm like, no, like don't do this. And I, like, everybody else for the most part was like, and then like there was this back and forth of, but this is a friend of one of the team members and all of that kind of stuff. And so finally we landed on, all right, we're doing this for a friend, like recognizing that we're breaking protocol and all of that kind of stuff. And so I'm like, you know what, at the very least, as we're getting a team together that's gonna go into this thing, and I'm doing my due diligence and all of this kind of stuff, fill out the mental health eval and at least do that portion. Fills it out, we get the team together, all of that kind of stuff. A couple weeks later, we all kind of jokingly, like, whenever we would come up to an investigation, it would kind of set the tone for things to ride up on it, blaring from the car, the Ghostbusters theme. Just, it was what we did. And I remember we're all laughing, we're all joking. It's all a good time as we're driving up to this place. We saw this place, and the laughing stopped. The jocularity stopped. Sometimes you walk into a situation woefully and ignorantly unprepared for what happens next. And y'all, when I say that we walked in with our pants around our ankles, so we walk in, right? And there's just this palpability about what's going on. Like, and at first I'm like, okay, this is nerves. right? Like dissecting those questions and asking those larger questions of, have we become victims of our own hype, right? And all of that kind of stuff. And we go through and we finally reach this point of getting all of our equipment set up and all of that, and we decide not to go directly to that room. We decide to explore around a bit, and we go up to the attic and we start doing some EVP up in the attic, electro voice phenomenon, for those of you that don't know. And we're like, we're exploring around up there, and again, just this feeling is really setting over everybody. And I'm coming around the corner, the steps go up and then to the and then off to the side and then up into the attic. I come around and I'm at the landing, so I'm looking down at the steps, or at the everybody sitting at the bottom of the steps. And they're like, there is something that like a darkness right next to you. Like, everybody is seeing this. It is right next to you. And like, there's just this like weird feeling, and like almost like the hairs, like there was like static, like on the, like causing the hairs on the back on my arm to stand on edge. And I go to like shift my weight, and like people took pictures. The pictures exist. There's distortion in the picture sitting next to me. I go to take a step down, and I get pushed. And I go down the steps. We still decide to stay.
Wow.
Again, this is the moment. Yeah. Oh, dude, this is.
Wow.
Yeah. So we move about. We go to a different bedroom to keep doing keep doing EVPs, all of this kind of stuff. Feels so weird to be talking about this. We are sitting there, and there's like this dresser that's off to the side, and there's picture frames on the dresser. And I walk in, I'm like, all right, let's start by praying the Lord's Prayer and going from there. So I do I start doing the Lord's Prayer. Picture frame comes flying at me, like goes across the room, man. And I'm like, I don't even know. Like, at this point, I'm like, okay, I have to be the reasonable one and be like, there are things happening here that are responding. Like, it's not like one person out of the group. It's not like we're in separate parts of the house and then somebody heard a thing and then somebody and this and that. Like, no, we're all together, because we made a point to say we're not splitting up. This is the whole team is staying together for this one.
Well, at least you did that right.
Yeah, exactly. At least I did that right. And so I went and I'm like, let's take 5. Let's catch a smoke break. Let's gain our composure. So we're outside. We're having a cigarette, and I'm like, I think we should wrap this thing up, man. Like, I think we need to go. Like, I think we have officially bitten off more than we can chew. Like, you need to call a priest. You need not us. And like that there was such an outcry from the family to stay and try and resolve this. that I made the decision to stay.
Hmm.
Because I thought that I was God's righteous warrior and that all of this was going to be okay. It wasn't. I wasn't. So we go to the source of the haunting. Like the actual events, like the room that we were in the first time. We get her to come into the room. And when she came into the room, the lights started flickering. And she started, like, we started praying. And I put my hand on her, and she was so upset when I was praying. I looked at her. Her eyes had grown black, and she punched me like hard in the face. Like turned around and sucker punched me in the face. Bro, I'm a boxer. Like I know how to take a punch. Like, yeah, I've been knocked out before, but I also know how to like take a hit. She hit me hard, bro. Like, I don't even know. And so she's like in pain as this is happening. And one of the other members of the team is there, and she's shaken. She's uncomfortable by this whole thing. I'm not gonna repeat everything that was said, but this woman who was the source of the events going on turns around and says some things closely associated with something that had happened to her, to happen to the member of our team previously, about some decisions that she made medically that she wouldn't have known, like the client wouldn't have known, and said so in a derogatory way. And like that was where things just started, like, if things hadn't already started getting bad, they really started getting bad at this point, because something fell off the wall, hit the bird cage that her bird was in her bedroom, killed the bird. And the dad apparently saw something. I say apparently because we're together in one part of the house. The dad's in a different part of the house. So this one, I very distinctly say apparently because we weren't right there. Apparently, the dad is experiencing something in another part of the house at the same time. The straw that breaks the camel's back is that another one of the team members ends up with a scratch from one side of the shoulder to the other side of the shoulder that's bleeding on her back. And I'm like, I'm done. I had to pull the equipment and pull the team. Now this is becoming a safety issue. So we're wrapping up. We're done. We put everything together. We're in the car. I'm giving one of the team members a ride home, and I keep seeing her look in my backseat. And I'm like, okay, I don't want the answer to this question. I really, really, honestly do not want the answer to this question. But why are you looking in my backseat?
Right.
She goes, there's something in your backseat. Something followed you home. I then, for the next several weeks, started seeing things out of the corner of my eye is where it would start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would be driving and I would see a shadowy mass like in the road. And I started having bouts of sleep paralysis. So I ended up having to go to I went away to a monastery. And eventually was able to no longer experience those things because I gone away to a monastery, went with some nuns, they prayed over me, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's the PG-13 version of my experience when I say that I have encountered the thing that goes bump in the night. That's when I stopped doing investigations wholesale. I was done after that point. And that was when I largely walked away from anything having to do with the spiritual and just kind of ignored it at that point, up until the point when I had my come to Jesus moment. So
yeah, that's sounds like a good episode of a of a supernatural show.
right. So
man.
So yeah, there it is, guys. You heard it here first. All
Man.
of the nitty gritty of all of that, but you know, I wanted to share all of that to try and counter with this idea of, you know, with when you consider all of this, when we say things like it's not, you know, it's not your great aunt Mildred. We're not saying, oh, because it's not your great aunt Mildred, that it's
not
fake.
real. Yeah.
That's why I share my story as a cautionary tale. You know what I mean? To be able to showcase the fact that we need to take this stuff seriously, and like Andrew said before he had to split, if we call ourselves Christians, then we are by default
right
stating openly that we at some level engage with the supernatural.
We have to, like you said, it's a conflict of two different kingdoms. Yeah. Right? Kingdom of light, kingdom of dark, however you want to phrase it. The kingdom of Christ versus, you know, the kingdoms of this world. You know, about 3 or 4, probably about 6 months now. Friend, his mother passed, and a couple of weeks after that, he said that she was coming to him, and she was, you know, in the house, that he would see things move, knocks on the wall, and his aunt that stayed with him said, yeah, I see it, but that's not your mom. That's not your mom. And he came to me about it. He says, hey, I've been experiencing this and feel like my mom is trying to reach out to me and talk to me. And I said, I don't think that's your mom. But if you keep entertaining it, you could be allowing for more and more physical manifestations of what it is.
Yeah,
it's not your mom. That, like you stated in your, that the physical manifestations began to become more intense, right? And I told him, I said, this could get intense. And I said, do you understand that that is not your mom, but it may be an entity because of your loss playing on your grief and, inserting itself into your life.
Yeah.
Do you want that to stop? I asked him, I said, do you want that to stop? Because if you don't want it to stop, then it doesn't matter if I pray, if, we get a bucket of holy water, whatever you want to try, right? It's not going to work if you're attached to this thing and you're allowing this to give you comfort. It's just like anything else in our lives, whether a spiritual manifestation or a natural manifestation. If I don't want to give it up, then it doesn't matter. And I said, in this situation, I said, do you understand? And we talked for a long time, and he says, yeah, I do understand. And I didn't go to the house or anything. I prayed with him over the phone, and those events ceased. He put his aunt on the phone, and she said, thank you for praying. She actually wanted to talk to me because she said, since you prayed, it has not manifested. We have not, we haven't seen, because she was experiencing it too. It wasn't like it was just him. It was just in his head. And she's like, this is wrong. She's like, what's happening here is wrong. Right. And so, I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, it's not that this is fake. These spiritual manifestations are real. It's just not what you think it is.
Right.
It's not Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe's gone. He's wherever he's at. But because of grief and loss, these are opportunities for deception and invitations to things like this. And I think when we watch those movies and hauntings and things like that, malevolent spirits and all that kind of stuff, it's not the person doing that.
Right.
There is something doing that, but it's not that person come back from the dead to seek revenge, right? I mean, that's a great narrative, and like you said, is a story that can be told, and but in all actuality, it's actually more sinister than even that story, so yeah, it is real, and people have to understand that.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us for another edition of Is It Pagan? Hopefully, we were able to clarify some things, be able to shed some light on some things. It's I know that there will be folks that have a wide variety of responses. These kinds of conversations have a way of eliciting very specific opinions and things like that. So, tune in or chime in rather in the comment section. We welcome the engagement. We welcome the interaction about these topics. And if there's anything that we have brought up or discussed, that you have more questions about, you would like to have further conversations about, you can feel free to hit us up and engage with us further about that. We welcome it for sure. Until next time, remember, you are prayed for, you are loved deeply. Peace, y'all.